One of the questions I get asked all the time is, Brandon, what style of content should we be using on social media in order to build a following, but also sales? And I always say, look, in order to generate sales and to build trust, there has to be different elements that you release at different times. And so I ended up having a conversation with someone who broke down how they use social media to build a 7-figure business. And they were releasing all of these different elements on their social media in order to grow and convert that following into sales. In fact, they have taught this exact process to hundreds, if not thousands of students. And so I interviewed this person, we broke it all down, and I'm going to leave it a surprise as to who it is and what industry they're in. So if you want to keep on listening to figure it out, well, we're about to roll that episode right now.
Hi, I'm Brandon Lucero, and you're about to experience the new way to thrive in business, entrepreneurship, and life by leaning into who you are, what you love, and standing up for what you want to create. Get ready, because this is where we go against the grain, say no to outdated society norms, and we say yes to change in order to create a happier, more fulfilled world. Welcome to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. We are back with our interviews. It's been a while, and I'm bringing you a good one. Today, we have Jill Coleman from Jill Fit. She is someone that I met through my good buddy, James Wedmore, and his mastermind, and we've done some work together. And she's built an amazing business over the last year. She's gone from 0 to a 7-figure business. And I always love interviewing people to figure out, what did they do? What are their strengths? And how can I share those strengths with you? And so I'm really, really honored to have Jill on the podcast today. So Jill, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to chat all the things.
Yeah, well, I'm excited as well. I think let's just start off with the basics. Like, can you just do a quick intro of who you are, what you do, and what your business does, and who you help?
For sure. So, yeah, my business is Jill Fit, like you mentioned, and I started out in 2010. So I've been doing online business now for 14 years, which is funny because I actually, every time I go to conferences, they're like, oh, you're such an OG, but it doesn't feel that way, but I guess that is like pretty old in internet years. But I started out as a health and fitness sort of entrepreneur. I was a personal trainer for a long time, and I just was like having all these amazing conversations with my clients. And I was like, let me put these on the internet and just start sharing some of the tools and strategies that I'm sharing with my in-person clients. And so like many, back in 2010, I started as a blogger, and over the course of about 18 months, we had grown like a really strong readership, and people were asking me like, how are you doing what you're doing? And I was like, well, I don't know, but I just blog all the time, and people seem to come, and we grew Jill Fit to a 6-figure per year business within 18 months, just doing one-on-one. I won't even say high ticket, low ticket, one-on-one coaching. And at that point, I just started teaching what I knew, which was sort of the blogging model, which of course that sort of expired. I would say that the efficacy of that probably around 2015, 2016. And I was sort of at that point forced to figure out like really internet business. And so I've been doing business coaching now in more of a serious capacity for about 8 to 10 years. And I've worked with over 2,500 health, wellness, fitness professionals to get them out of the gym, out of the clinic, and get them online doing full-time virtual training. So it's been really fun.
I love it. So when you were blogging, what were you blogging about?
It was just mostly, I'll be honest, recipes and workouts. Very, very basic stuff. But these were some of the things that people really wanted at that time. And I was not a good writer. That was like my worst subject in school. People would write in and say, hey, like, do you mind if I edit your blogs? I'll do it for free. They're so annoying. Like, the grammars, the spelling, the grammar, everything. But I was really good at one thing. I was not the smartest. I wasn't the leanest. I didn't have the most connections, but I was really good at one thing, and that was consistency. And so now when we see people come into the space, a lot of times it's like, what are you willing to be consistent with? Because you can afford to be really bad at the beginning, because over time, and you know this, obviously, quantity begets quality. And that's exactly what happened with my writing. I just sat down and forced myself to blog every single day, even when I had no ideas, even when I was like, this is not good, but it was just, I had just done it so much and was so prolific that over time, not only did my actual writing get better, became more compelling, got better at copywriting, right? All these kind of business skills, and like my quote unquote arguments, or the things that I was teaching, became more, how do I say this, like rich, more nuanced. It wasn't just workouts and recipes anymore. It was like, let's talk about habit change and psychology of fitness psychology, and like all of these kind of more lateral connections were made. And it just really made the brand sort of stand out, especially at that time when a lot of people were doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting too, because I was the same way. Like, English was my worst subject in school, hated it. So if you would tell me that I made was going to make millions of dollars teaching people how to communicate and write. I'm like, no, you're crazy.
So great.
But it's the same thing as the consistency. It's like
Yep.
we're continuing to write in ads and figure out copywriting, and then just fine tune these skills over the years. That makes a lot
I
of
always
sense.
say that entrepreneurship is like just writing 2,000 words a day. Like it just is. You know, you're writing like ad copy, you're writing emails, you're writing sales
So much,
pages.
right?
It's a lot. And I never, like you, I was a math and science person, right? I'm a fitness person. So I geeked out on biochemistry and all that kind of stuff. And then you sort of start to get a taste of business, and you realize that business is both an art and a science in a way. You know, there's when we get down to numbers, and you and I work together, and I know you're really big on metrics and numbers and things like that. And a lot of times, like, especially if you're newer to the space, you're so, what's the word? You just think it's like vibes and energy, and like, you know, you're kind of get caught up in your emotions, which is all fine. That's part of the process. But once you really start seeing the science of business, now all of a sudden you're like, okay, I realize that I have this sales mechanism or this vehicle that I'm launching. And I know I put leads in and I get sales out. I always talk about it like a washing machine, right? You put the dirty clothes in, you do a bunch of stuff to them, and then sales come out the other side. And there really is a lot of predictability in online business, and people think it's so crazy and you never know what's going to happen. And I'm like, well, you actually do. If you just do the same thing enough times, you start to see patterns and you're able to iterate, and it becomes very predictable, and it doesn't become this very risky thing, but you sort of have to get to that point.
Well, it is. It totally is. And I know we're getting off on a little bit of a tangent here, but I think it's great for people to understand this, is that business is not so much a math equation where 1 + 1 always equals 2. It's like there's always tests that need to be done, like a science experiment, you know, and there's a hypothesis. I think this will work. Okay, get the data, we can go back and then eventually you figure out the answers that way. And I think a lot of people need to understand that, but you also can't do that unless you monitor your numbers and your data and all of that stuff. So
totally. And what I hate to see, especially because I work with a lot of beginners to the space, like very new, maybe they're personal trainers and they come online and they'll oftentimes do one single launch and they didn't get the result that they wanted. And so they go, oh, I guess I got to just start over. And I'm like, don't start over. There's so much good stuff there, right? Like if we keep on, we could identify some patterns, but they're starting from scratch over and over again. So I think there's this, and I know this is a little bit of a tangent too, but there's definitely a mismanagement of expectations. I feel like, especially in the beginning, but if you can get through those beginning stages of feeling like this isn't working or feeling like no one's paying attention or having all of those sort of what I call like more of those beginner mindset issues, you can get to the other side of that. There's so much on the other side, but so few people get there because they're not willing to stick it out when things are not seemingly happening all the time. It's just like weight loss, right? I mean, if someone wants to lose weight, there's so many parallels. It's like you got to eat the salad and go to the gym, even if you're not losing 2 pounds a day forever and ever, but you know that it's working. It's the same thing with business.
Yeah, 100%. So how did you make the transition? Because I know you were like blogging and you were kind of doing the recipes, like you said, and workout routines and things. Now to working with, I believe, a different demographic and teaching a different thing. Like back then, it was like you're almost were the personal trainer or the coach of fitness. Now you take wellness coaches and practitioners and personal trainers and you teach them business. So how did that transition start for you? How did you make that transition?
Mm-hmm. So like, it's funny. A friend of mine says, instead of calling it like word of mouth, it's word of obvious. So if people can see that you're doing something, they're like, what are you doing? They're like, I know something is happening for you, but what is it? And so within those first 2 years at JillFit, people were like, what are you doing? Like you're posting all this stuff and you're doing all this thing. And so I was like, well, I don't really know everything about business, but I can certainly tell you what I've done. And so at first it kind of started out as more of a quote unquote, and I hate this word, but mindset sort of coaching. Cause it was like, maybe I could start my own thing. Maybe I could start a blog. You know, it didn't seem like I'm starting a business. It wasn't like I'm getting this, you know, S Corp. It was like, oh, maybe I could just put my ideas on the internet and see what happens. And so a lot of my early business coaching years was really just instilling a sense of possibility for these trainers that they could make a couple extra bucks online in addition to the classes that we're teaching and the fitness training that they were doing in person. And then I just really started nerding out. I had this sort of come to Jesus moment in my business in 2015 that really changed a lot for me because I had mentioned that I was teaching a blogging model. So my clients would come in, I'm like, okay, just post a blog every single week.
Right.
And, it's sort of this like inbound marketing strategy, attraction marketing, SEO. And it wasn't working the way that it was working for me in 2010. And so around 2015, 2016, my clients were like, Jill, like I'm getting really good at writing, but no one's reading it. No, I'm not having it. So I had a real, and I think this happens to a lot of entrepreneurs who've been in the space for a long time, something that was working and that you built your business on working stops working the same. And
Right.
you're forced to iterate. And I had this moment of like, God, if it's not the blogging model, what is it? And is this the end of my career? Like, I don't know anything else. So at that point, I just geeked out and I learned everything I possibly could on digital business. I went to courses, I joined masterminds. I was like, I need to figure this out if I really want to continue doing business coaching. And, as one does, as soon as you start doing some of that stuff, you have other people's IP that you teach and that you start off sharing with your audience. But over time, you have enough reps yourself that you start to create your own IP. You have your own ideas about things. You have your own systems, methodologies, frameworks that you've just seen in practice. I didn't need a book to tell me it. I didn't need, a podcast host to share it with me, a course creator to share it with me. I've had enough reps now that I have my own IP that I can now teach as a business coach. And so I think to myself, when people ask like themselves, maybe what am I passionate about or what should my niche be? Just ask yourself, if you could go to any conference in the world, what conference would you go to? And for me, it's business every day, all day, hands down. So I know that that's the thing I'm meant to be doing. The fitness stuff is great. It's, I know it, I love it, but it's also not the thing that I want to primarily help folks with. And so for me, it's pretty much at this point at Jill Fit, we do about 80% of our revenue in business coaching and about 20% still B2C. Fitness and nutrition coaching.
I didn't know you still did the B2C. That's awesome.
We do about 1 6-figure launch a year for a new fitness program. So, and then we have a nutrition certification too, but that I'm like not really involved in that side of the business anymore.
I love it. Okay. I want to highlight something you said. I think it's very important, which is that you built the first version, let's just call it the first version or the early version of the business off of other people's IP. And I think sometimes, at least I've experienced this. I don't know if you've experienced this with your students, but they kind of get into these mindset issues of like, well, I can't sell someone else's stuff. And I always have to help them overcome that. And I also have to get them to a point to realize, look, the people that really make it are the ones that eventually develop their own IP because they're discovering things that other people haven't discovered yet. And that takes time and it takes experience and it takes working with people. So how did you overcome that did you even have a mindset issue to overcome with building off of someone else's things? Do your students have those issues? If so, what advice would you give of overcoming that?
Yes. So this is a really important question, I think, especially for newer students. Realize that you're not going to have your own IP, your own way of saying like creativity is a skill, right? It's a skill. And so creativity begets more creativity. So I think I think that it's a little bit misguided to think that you're supposed to come online and within 6 months, like know exactly what you're going to be teaching and have your full curriculum like tied up with a bow. So I actually call this a level 1 and a level 2 expert. So a lot of times my clients, they doubt their expertise. Am I good enough? Can I be, it's a lot of these like not good enough. I don't have enough credentials. I need more certifications, all those kind of things. And that's only one version of an expert, by the way, is like this sort of book smart credentials, certifications. The other kinds of experts are in the trenches. Are you a results getter? Are you someone who's just seen, a lot of my clients don't think they're experts. And I'm like, well, how long have you been a personal trainer? They're like 20 years. I'm like, how many clients you've seen over the course of 20 years? They're like, I don't know, probably 10,000. I'm like, you're an expert, right? But you don't have a PhD, but you're an expert. You know what to do if you get a client. And the other version of the expert, which I deal with a lot, are what I call the role model expert, which is someone who maybe doesn't have a lot of clients yet, but they walk their walk. So they can say, you know what, I don't know everything, but I can share with you what has worked for me. And that's, I think, a good starting place for some people. And so the level 1 expert comes in and they do only have what they've learned from others, the certification that they've taken, the podcasts that they listen to, the books that they've read. As long as you are giving credit in an appropriate way, I think that's totally fine. That's how everyone starts. That's how everyone begins. And that's certainly how I started. A level 2 expert is the person who's creating the IP that now others are regurgitating. And at that point, that's sort of where you want to be, is to where you're creating something that could eventually be a certification maybe, or something that you're putting out there. You have your own systems, frameworks, but oftentimes you can't create those without getting a ton of reps. You just need to be like, and I'll give you guys an example, a really tangible example. One of the things that I did early in my career was I helped people get up on stage as competitors. So if they wanted to compete in a fitness competition or a figure competition or bodybuilding show, these were very elite level fitness people. And I did that for the first 2 years in my business. I worked with these competitors. And what I started to notice was a lot of them were just yo-yo dieting. They would get super lean for stage and they would follow the program. Then they would get off and they would binge. And this was actually my story. And I was like, what's the solution for this? Like, why is no one talking about this? This wasn't in the magazines. No one's talking about this. And this is happening with my clients. And it's like, not that they just have terrible willpower. It's like, what's happening here? There needs to be a solution. And out of that sort of quandary came the Moderation 365 nutrition philosophy, which is what we teach at JillFit. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's moderate eating 365 days a year. And it became a solution and a whole curriculum that we now certify people in to teach them how to get out of that all or nothing mentality. But there was nothing that existed at that time. Now you see things that are more flexible dieting, you see more intuitive eating, but this is back in 2012. And so that IP came out of the fact that there was nothing sort of out there, at least within my sphere, that could help these clients. So if you are truly a creator and a business and you're a problem solver, it's your job to then figure out, okay, my clients are struggling with this thing and there's not some kind of other solution out here. I need to be the one to create it. And you'll know when that time happens. It doesn't take forever, but within the first couple of years, you'll be like, okay, yeah, I need to create my own thing because this doesn't exist yet. So I love that you said that too.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's one of the things I tell people is like, I wouldn't say talk down on, but I guess make people aware is like, if you only base your level of expertise off your education, all you're doing is regurgitating. And then when you get to that place, it's really hard to differentiate yourself because you're just saying and teaching the same thing as everyone else. But ironically, that is literally where you have to start because you have nowhere else to go. But that is what leads you to finding those gaps. And that's what leads you to like working with clients. You're like, oh, well, I never thought of this problem before. Let me come up with a solution. And just by default of like running a business and working with people, you'll start to uncover your own stuff, but you do have to start at that level 1. What I also have found is that when you start to move from like level 1 and level up to like level 2, and you're basing things more off of your own experience and IP, it also helps you create better content. Have you noticed that as well?
Totally. And maybe this is something for you too. You start to think in frameworks versus random tools and tips, right? So for example, if someone came to me and was like, hey, Jill, I want to lose weight. And I was like, okay, great. Here's 20 tips to follow. They wouldn't probably be able to follow any of them. But if I said, hey, let me teach you the MAD nutrition model that we teach at Moderation 365, there's 4 big pillars that you have to master. And it's MMAD, and we walk you through, and there's tools under each one of those pillars. Now, all of a sudden, not only is it feeling doable and like, okay, I can track my progress, but as a salesperson, if you're listening to this is something that you could use on sales calls that make potential clients feel much safer investing with you, because it's not just like, oh, we'll work together and we'll figure out what you need and troubleshoot along the way. That feels too random. It doesn't feel safe. It doesn't feel certain. But if you have some kind of system, framework, process, I'm a big fan of like alliteration and acronyms. Now, all of a sudden it creates safety for the client, and it also helps you to educate on these things. So before you and I turned the mic on, we were talking about, I have like the 6 S's of social media. That's just a way to organize information. And I think that happens naturally over time as you just become more of a creator and a coach.
Yeah, I'd love to dive into those, the 6 S's. Is that how you built your business now, is like using these 6 pillars of social media content?
Yeah, actually, this is really like a meta example of what we're talking about, which is in my experience, first you do the thing and then you look back at the thing you did and you go, what did I do actually? Like what was was I doing? And you sometimes have to jog your memory and be like, yeah, what was I trying to do there? And then you kind of fill in the gaps and then it becomes a system. And so, at JillFit, I don't have like a massive following, but I have a really strong organic, I've been doing this for a long time, right? So some people have been following for 10, 12 years. And so we have a really high trust with our audience. They have been around, they've seen me go through some of my personal stuff. They've just been around. As a blogger, you just are very open about, I've kind of pulled back a little bit about that, but there is a lot of that sort of personal stuff. And that's actually one of the S's, which is called your superpowers. Your superpower is like, these are just the things about you that have nothing to do with your expertise, but that your audience comes to know about you, right? I have a dog that's like this little dog that I take. I snowboard a lot. I go camping with my partner. I live at the beach. Like all of these things that have nothing to do with my expertise, but that people will send me a meme about. They're like, oh my God, I know you love palm skis. Like, look at these palm skis, right? So it's the things that you connect with your audience on. And these oftentimes will be the reason someone enrolls with you, is because they're like, someone literally said, you deadlift and you say the word fuck. That's why I joined your mastermind. Because I mean, obviously they need to feel like you're an expert, you can help, but that's the thing. And so when we forget to sort of cycle through some of these, what I call knowables, it leaves people they don't want to hire just the smartest person. They want to hire the person they feel like can understand them. And so, they want to hire someone like, oh, if Jill lived next door, we would, we'd have a glass of wine together on the porch. Like they want to have that sort of connection. So that's the superpower, part of it, which is the first S.
And how do you normally do that? Is it just like using stories? Okay. Stories is the best way to do it.
Stories is the best place to put that. Like from a logistical perspective, yeah, stories is the best place.
Okay, cool.
And you'll know if you have these because people will start repeating them back to you, right? So your audience will pick your knowables. They're the ones who, if they start sending you memes, they're like, oh, I saw this and thought of you. Now you know that but you do have to be strategic with this as a content creator. I'll look back and be like, oh, I haven't shared Pip in a couple of months, right? Pip's my dog. So it's like, oh, let me just I know this sounds kind of contrived, but in a way, you have to have 3, 4, maybe 5 of these things that your audience can really connect on. When I got a new car, 4 years ago, and I never got more DM responses than when I got on my stories and said, hey, you guys, I'm getting a new car. Can you guess what car it's going to be? Why was this the most responded to story? Because everyone drives, everyone has a car, everyone has a license, right? So there's a lot more connection points. I was actually low key offended by some of the choices people, they were like, you're a Prius. I was like, nope. Pickup truck. Well. It's a good branding exercise, right? It's a good branding exercise.
What car did you end up getting?
I ended up getting a BMW X6, but it was funny. A lot of people were saying like a Jeep or a Tesla, or which is interesting from a branding perspective. But so that just goes to show that people want to connect. That's why they're there. They're not on social media to buy stuff. They're there because they're looking for entertainment, education, connection, engagement.
How did do you pick the 4 to 5 things, or do you just kind of share things and see what sort of sticks and then just stay with those?
Yeah, they're going to change throughout your career, especially if you have a long career. So I went through a period after my divorce, and my audience, of course, went through that with me, and where I was kind of like a single gal in Los Angeles and was like, going out for drinks a lot. So people started sending me wine memes, and I was like, this is probably not what I want to be known for. But it evolves. And, now I don't get stuff like that, but I get stuff about, the beach or snowboarding or some of those things. So yeah, I would say share the things that you're excited about. And it doesn't have to be so strategic, but share the things that you're doing. And I kind of think about, especially Instagram stories, Facebook stories, I think about them sort of like a storyline, exactly who are the main characters? What are the narratives? Who are the people involved? So that whether that's your kids, your partner, your wife, your husband, your best friend, people want to be part of those interactions. This is why we like reality television, right? We don't know anything about those people, but we just feel invested because we keep seeing them and we see the fun or interesting dynamic that they have together. And so you are in a way crafting your own little kind of reality show. Now, I don't know that we want to be on social media all day, every day, posting every single thing. Some people do. But I enjoy sharing 3, 4, 5 things that are part of my private life, and people feel invested in those, and and then we get to connect on those.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. We talk a lot about connection content, but you took it to a whole nother level with that, because I can definitely do a better job sharing connection content stories. I don't think I really do any. So I need to get back.
I mean, we do know that you're married and have a couple kids. We do know that.
Yeah, I do talk about that a lot, but yeah. Okay, so that's number one. What's number two?
The other two that most people will probably know is solutions and stories. So solutions are really easy. This is where, like, especially if you're a newer online coach, I just think it's silly to not share what you know for free, especially when you're getting started. You know, it's like, I don't know, I always make this analogy, like it's kind of going into, I don't know, going into Target and being like, hey, I'm looking for a red couch. And they're like, awesome, we have one in the back. And you're like, cool, can I see it? And they're like, well, no, it's in the back though. Believe me, we got it. And you're like, okay, I don't know if I want to buy it without looking at it. So it's kind of the same thing. People do need to know that in some way, shape, or form, you are an expert. And so this is going to be your authority content. This is going to be your solutions content. Usually I have my clients just do a brain dump on like 10, 20, 30 frequently asked questions or common concerns of their ideal client and answer them as if that person was in front of them. This does not need to be the most creative thing. You're a personal trainer. Clients are at the gym asking you what they should eat after their workout.
Yeah.
Great. Put that right in a post. Super simple, direct to the point, solutions-based post. Stories posts are also meant to connect. Now, stories are probably going to most likely attract your ideal client. This is typically going to be, especially if your ideal client is a previous version of you, then maybe you tell your own story. You tell your own macro story. You tell your own micro story. In small instances in time when you used to do something else and now you do something different. So those typically, I usually recommend sharing at least one story per week, at least of you or your own client. This can also be done on stories in a really fun sort of case study type way. So for example, if you're listening to this and you're a coach and you are doing one-on-one client calls, right? You just got off a call. Your client, asked a question. You went through something really, great with them. You could just easily get on your stories and say, hey guys, I just got off a call with a client and the client's biggest concern was this, and here's how we tackled it, and here's what she's doing differently. So in a way, you're kind of giving a live testimonial. It doesn't have to be one of these, really put together testimonials, but this is a story of success. When this person came to me 3 months ago, they were really struggling with X, Y, and Z. Here's the 3 things we've done since then, and here's how they're going through their life now. You guys can do that once a week on stories very easily, just talking straight face to camera. So this is going to be sharing your own story and sharing your client's stories, and that should be done at least once a week to connect.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And
so those are the first 3: superpowers, solutions, and stories.
Okay, great, awesome. And then when it comes to story, is a good approach to take, because I kind of picked up on this, although you didn't really say it, but the story, if you're teaching your own story, is it just tell your story for the sake of telling your story, or is there always like a lesson in the story, some sort of education or piece of wisdom to drop with that story?
Yeah. So this was actually one of the benefits of, and I actually thought about your work with this too, because this was one of the things that as a blogger you get really good at. Like, you have to tell stories, right, as a blog. Right. So I had this one blog that went super viral early on, and it was called "What It Feels Like to Regain Weight After You've Lost It." And it was just me writing about how I had regained weight after I was competing and how I regained weight. And it was so specific, so tangible. I remember publishing it and going, no one is going to relate to this. It is so specific. Like, I'm sharing exactly thoughts, feelings, emotions, everything that was happening in my head, and it went completely viral. And it goes to your work, which is the more specific you can become, the more universal, the less it becomes, right? And so when we tell a story, we really do need to focus on the psychographics instead of the sort of demographics. So if you just tell a story and you're like, I was there and that happened and that person said that, it's not going to connect with anybody, right? It's too vague. It's not going to connect with anyone. But if you go through because a lot of my clients are nutrition and fitness professionals. So if you tell a story and you say, I was sitting there and I was forcing myself to eat this cold, soggy asparagus out of a plastic bag while I'm driving to the gym because I truly thought that this is what I needed to do to lose the last 5 pounds. Someone's picturing that in their head. Now, I'm sure no one else did that except for me, but they go, you know what? I didn't do that, but I remember being at a family reunion and I was in the closet eating out of a Tupperware while everyone else was enjoying the meal because I was that obsessed with food and weight loss and everything, right? So the more specific you can make it, the more universal it becomes. And so that's where the connection piece comes in. Yeah. Now, to your point about, does it just become like telling a story, can just easily become dumping in a way. Like
Yeah.
this thing was bad. This thing happened. There's a lot of like vulnerability content on social media right now, which, I think is better than not having that. But a lot of times there's sort of, they call it like vulnerability. I think it's called vulnerability baiting or something. It's kind of like this where people are showing themselves just crying on their stories and stuff. And there's really not a lot of like positive turnaround or a lot of like lesson or do this instead or possibility. It's more about like, it's all bad. And I think that is not inspiring. That doesn't make someone feel safe to want to work with you, right? It's like we can all connect on how bad things are. That's not hard, right? That's kind of like the victim mentality. But what's the solution? What's the turnaround? What do you do from here? What's the action item? And I think if you can tie all of that in and say, this was the one thing that got me out of that space. This is the one aha moment that I had that really changed things for me. And here's what I started doing instead. Now it becomes connection plus possibility, which is really what you want for the story.
Yeah. And I think it's a really good thing to a good point to make. James and I actually talk a lot about this, about like people who share that they're going through a hard time, which I think is okay and fine to do, but it can come off of a little bit of that victim mentality, or like you're pulling energy from the audience, like feel sorry for me, give me your condolences, like you send me your DMs as I go through this hard time. Which again, I think every once in a while it can be okay, but you have to really be careful, because if someone's looking to you as the leader or an expert, I always think it's a better idea to get through those hard times and then share the lessons and what had happened and then share the story. So that's not a, hey, feel bad for me, I'm the victim. It's more of like, look, I went through a really hard time. I can relate to you guys if you're going through it. And then here's the lessons I learned, is the approach that I usually tend to take. But I guess, you just have to be really careful with that. And hopefully this doesn't come off as like very, I don't know what the right word would be, like just not compassionate, because, we all have hard times, but you just really gotta, and this is what James and I kind of concluded on, is you just have to be careful with why your audience is following you. And you want them following you for the right reasons. And so I'm glad you brought that up. And it's a very good point.
I think I've heard it said this way, that like, don't share the wound, share the scab. So in a way, like when it's a gaping wound, like you haven't even made sense of it yet. Right. So like, how could you, at best, it would be like just misguided. At worst, it could be catastrophic. Right. So I think there's a level of sort of, resolve that you have to make it a service to your audience. I love saying like, are you pulling from your audience? Because that's the last thing you want to be doing, especially if you're trying to build a business. Like if you just want to have a fun, little, social media account, that's fine. But if you're truly wanting to step into leadership, it's not that you can't let people see you sweat. I think it's important to be relatable, but I think there has to be an aspirational quality to you as a coach, as a content creator, course creator.
100%. Couldn't agree more. I'm glad you brought it up. Okay, so we have superpowers, what you know, or the solution, your story. What's number 4?
So we have system, which is what we were talking about earlier, which is your methodology or the way in which you help people. So we know when it comes to like niching down, it's basically like the 3 big things is like, what problem do you solve? Who do you solve it for? And how do you solve it? And so the how do you solve it is where a lot of people come into our space. And I'm sure you've heard this too, Brandon, where people are like, it's so saturated, there's no room, which in a way, yes, there's more coaches online today than were yesterday, but this is where the opportunity lies, is how you do what you do. So, when you come into the health and fitness space specifically, there's only so many different types of ways to eat. There's only so many different types of workouts, right? So someone comes in, they go, well, I do macros. I'm like, okay, cool. What about macros? Okay, you want people to, people need to prioritize protein. I'm like, okay, how do you help people get 100 grams of protein a day? Like you have your own system, your own framework that you teach to help people get 100 grams of protein a day. So let's talk about that. So oftentimes what I see, especially my newer coaches, they just don't feel like they have anything to offer. And I'm like, but you do. You've had success. What is that way? How do you arrange the things in a specific way to create a system or a framework or a methodology or an acronym? And so that's going to be, here, this is, again, we talked about earlier, creating a level of safety and certainty for your potential clients is they go, and then how you know if this is sticking, if you're talking about your system enough, is they start repeating it back to you.
Yeah.
They start repeating your IP back to you, and they're like, oh, yeah. And they start using your tools and your names and things like that. And so that's how you know that it's starting to really catch on. Again, this just creates safety for people, and it creates a level of organization and certainty when they go to purchase. They go, okay, I'm buying a system. I'm not just buying random tools and tips.
Right. What do you call this? You call it system, like in
System.
your program? System?
Yeah, like, so because it's 6 S's, so we made it system, but it could be your methodology too. Yeah. Okay. So typically, we start with like, what's the end goal? So like, what's the result, right? So people are buying a result. They don't care how many Zoom calls it takes, how many phone calls, how many Voxer messages, right? They don't care how many of those things it takes to get the result. What they care about is the result. So then you can say, okay, these are the 5, 4, 6, 7 big dial movers that all of my clients need to master in order to get the result. So some people will go faster, some people will go slower, whatever. But that's if there's these 5, 6, 7 big pillars, big rocks, big dial movers that people have to master to get that result. It's like, okay, yeah, I can do that. And I just sort of systematically learn and implement those things. And so we call it system just because it's easy, part of the 6 S's.
And it fits with the S's. And and the reason why I was asking is because, there's 2 points I wanted to make to this is because I'm sure you hear this with your students all the time. People go like, well, Brandon, I don't have a unique process or a system. And it's like, yes, you do. Like there are steps that you take your clients through, right? Like if someone paid you money right now, there's going to be a process you take them through. That is like, just bundle that up into pillars or steps or something. That's your unique solution your system. The reason why I asked you what you call yours is because our solution, unique solution, right?
Okay.
And that's why I just had that mess up because that's just my mind. But and this also proves the point with a lot of students. They go, well, Brandon, it's not different than anybody else's. It's not like it is. It's like, who cares? Just give it your own name so that it lives within your brand as its own thing. Like you call this concept system, I call it unique solution. It's like we may have our different ways of teaching it, but the concept is basically the same. And there's nothing wrong with that. You guys can take someone else's IP and improve on it or make it a little bit better or add something else in there and then give it your own name that lives within your brand. That's totally, totally fine to do. And so
I love that you mentioned that because this is what we were talking about earlier, where you kind of have to think back on how you do what you do. A lot of people who are, because remember, if you're listening to this and you're a coach, you've already made the transformation. You're on the other side of it. You got it. You're good. Like you walk your walk. You know this stuff. So oftentimes you take it for granted. So you have to think back and go, yeah, if this is the thing that I did and I'm trying to help people with it, what did I do? So I'll give you guys an example. One of the pillars of the Moderation 365 nutrition program that we teach is abundance. So it's MMAD, which doesn't really make any sense, but A stands for abundance mindset, because a lot of my clients have food scarcity, like things like, is there going to be enough food there? Am I getting enough protein? What if I go to the store and there's nothing I can eat? Or maybe I go to a restaurant, there's nothing I can get on the menu. Like a lot of there's not going to be enough food, or I have to eat all of it right now because on Monday it's going to be off limits, and all these kind of like food psychology things. And I was thinking back to myself and I was like, how did I become like more abundant around food? I know it's kind of like a very very nuanced thing, but people, if you've ever had the experience, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And I was like, I remember this one time I was doing cheat meals. I don't know if you've ever done cheat meals or cheat days or whatever. And I had this cheat meal and it was like a Reese's Pieces bag. And at the time, my husband grabbed the bag and took a handful of it and ate it. And I started crying, like grown woman crying, because part of my dedicated cheat meal was gone.
Right.
And I was like, okay, this is dysfunctional. I need to figure this out. How can I figure this out? And the tool that helped me, looking back, and also this is now what we teach, is when I say you're going to be like, that's so strange, but also yes, is sharing food. That was the tool. So for example, forcing yourself when you're having your cheat meal to ask your spouse, hey, do you want a bite of this? Hey, would you like a sip of this cocktail or whatever it is, right? Even though you hope they say no, you have to endure that experience. I know this kind of sounds strange, but if anyone is listening to this and has had, food obsession or all or nothing thinking around food, you've probably had this experience where you're like, don't touch my food. So we actually now teach the tool is share your food. Ask people if they want to bite. Ask them if they want to sip. Ask them if they want to try it, because that's going to help you get and realize that food is available all the time. You can get, a pumpkin pie, not just on Thanksgiving. You can go to the store and buy one right now, so it's a lot of those kind of things. So if you're trying to figure out what is my unique way, you might have to look back and jog your memory and be like, how did I get out of that big struggle I was having?
Yeah. And I like that tool, the sharing, because it's like, it's great on multiple levels, because it sets the expectation of like, here's what could go wrong or happen, which is the sharing of the food, which is great. But it's also a very healing practice to sit in those uncomfortable situations or feelings until they become normal. But what I love is like how you even created that, which is like looking back. And so a lot of people ask me sometimes like, Brandon, how'd you come up with that framework? I'm like, I don't know. I just wrote a video and I thought it was really good. And then I just went back and looked at what did I do at each thing. And then I just made a framework off of it. And maybe I shouldn't be saying this on the podcast, but sometimes I even watch other people's like ads and like, that was a really good ad. What did they do? And then I just take the framework and make it my own. And I was like, okay, I see what they're doing, but and so looking back at something that really worked is an amazing way.
And also your brain starts to work in this way too, I will say, right? Like over time, you have enough experiences that you're like, I know the general sort of order of things is this. Now let me see if I can match it up. So it's an acronym, or it's the 6 S's or the 3 M's or the 5 T's or whatever, so that it just feels a little bit more organized.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that was number 4, right? That was system.
Yep. We got 2 more. So services. So this is going to be your sales content. So this is where you talk about any of your offers. This is where you talk about like, here's the ways to work with me. Here's the program we have coming up. Here's the doors open, right? So this is going to be your services post. Now, for those who are newer to the space, this is probably going to be the hardest one to talk about, because you're like, I don't want to annoy my friends and family, and I don't want people to think I'm sleazy and salesy and whatever. But again, if people don't know what you offer, then how could they possibly want to work with you? So not only, and services posts aren't just when you're selling, right? So it's like, okay, doors are open. Great. That's definitely going to be more services posts, but really it's also building familiarity for your offers year round. So for example, for our signature offer, which is called FBA, we only open doors twice a year for 4 days. So only 8 days of the entire year can people purchase the program, but I'm constantly talking about FBA all the time. And it's just contextual. So a services post could be like, oh, a couple of my FBA students came to me with this idea and we worked through it and this was whatever. So I'm not actively promoting FBA. I'm not saying go to this sales page, here's the link. I'm literally just building familiarity around it. And so you want your programs themselves to have a reputation. I want people putting it up on their vision board. I want people saving up to be like, when are the doors opening again? And so by having and talking about your services often, even just in a contextual way, you are building anticipation, you're building reputation, you're building familiarity, and familiarity breeds trust. If people see it all the time and they hear you talking about it all the time, they're going to start to think to themselves, oh, maybe I should. What should I get on the interest list? That sounds like, oh, maybe people are doing that. Maybe I should. So it does create a level of trust. It's really interesting. I think I might have told you this before, but when you're working together, but this is relevant because it's election time. Those lawn signs that people have on their front lawns? Like, I was kind of like, why do people have those? Especially for like the local elections, like whatever, but people have them everywhere. And I was like, do these things even work? They've shown in research that when people go to the polls, of course, they know who the big player, they know the president and they know like the bigger ones. But for a lot of the local elections, people will just vote based on the name they recognize.
Yeah.
They don't even know the politics, the platform. They don't know. They will literally just go, I recognize that name.
Yeah.
So that just tells us that the more people see it, the more they automatically come to trust it. And so you do want to share about your services quite a bit. And so if you're looking for a cadence, I usually recommend at least once a week, you're talking about an offer even if it's just talking about student success, client success, a tool from it, maybe when doors are opening, getting people on a wait list, anything like that to build familiarity year round, especially for your signature offer.
Yeah. And it just builds demand throughout the year, especially if you're on the launch model. Like we've recognized that as well. I also thought it was really funny. I don't know why it even never registered in my brain until, you mentioned it, but your program is FBA, mine's NGM, James's is BBD. Like, why do we even come up with names for our programs? Because everyone just refers to them as like the initials or the acronym.
I know.
Like everyone's like, I want NGM, but I don't know what it stands for. I'm like, it doesn't even matter.
Don't even. Yeah. No, the brand is just NGM. Yeah, it is. It's just easier, right? Mine's a mouthful. Fitness Business Accelerator. It's too much.
Yeah. It's a lot. Yeah. Okay. Love that. Number 6. What is it?
Last one actually is inspired by you. It's symptoms. So the last one is the newest one I just added last year, and it is symptoms. And this is where typically it's going to be either a reel or a carousel post where you're talking through some of the biggest pain points and, like you say, unwanted experiences that people are having. So there's no solution to these posts. There's no like, here's the solution. The solution is to join the free experience, to get the course, to buy the thing, whatever. So it sort of just is all about just connecting. So this is where you have the 6 mistakes you're making, the 5 reasons why, the 6 signs you're X, Y, and Z. And this is where people are going, yes, check, 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 check. This is all me. And then they're going, what's the solution? And you're like, come to the webinar to find out, right? So it's focused on the symptoms that they are experiencing. And then from there, getting them to creating demand for them to want the solution. And the solution is going to be off the post.
I love that. I mean, when I look through all of these, it's just, for me, when I just tell people, it's like when you want to sell something, there's all these different elements that you have to hit. And these 6 things hit all of those elements beautifully. And even some of the stuff I teach overlaps some of the stuff that you're teaching, but like even adding in like the story and the 2 different types of story and stuff like that isn't really stuff that we do too much, that I think I need to do a better job of. Even just adding in like connection stuff through stories, I think is really, really powerful. But I guess my question to you is like, when you create like a launch or, maybe longer form content, whether it's a podcast episode or a webinar, are you using all 6 of these in those longer form pieces of content as well?
Like, you mean if I'm doing like a 3-part live training or a podcast episode? No, not typically. So there's usually a cadence for some of these things. So for example, I teach a launch model. So, if you're listening to this and you're doing more evergreen, then, you're probably going to want to include more services posts, more, solutions, more symptoms more regularly. One thing that people need to know about social media is there's a strategy for growth and there's a strategy for just building trust, and they're different strategies. So what a lot of people do is they come online and like, I want to grow an audience. And I can tell you this because I have a bunch of students that are growing really fast right now. They are focusing on more growth content, and it's mostly solutions content. So it's like how-to stuff. So, and I work with a lot of movement professionals, fitness professionals. It's so easy for these people to just churn out tools, strategies, protocols, systems, little hacks. And these people's accounts are growing like crazy. And it makes a lot of sense because there's a lot of utility by following this person. But there's probably not as much connection. That's probably going to be the next thing I need to focus on is like, okay, I'm following this account. I'll give you an example. One of my clients, Melissa, she is a PT for hypermobile humans, people who are hypermobile. And her account is going gangbusters right now because she's just sharing like more connection-based content around like, oh, you're hypermobile, ask your PT to do this, or have you tried this exercise? Everything is very much if this, then that. And her account is growing like crazy because people are seeing it as a hub. They're like, I'm hypermobile. This person's really smart. I'm going to just consume all this content. And that will definitely get you growth because people want to follow accounts that they're interested in and are relevant to them. But what we have to also pay attention to is, do these people care about working with Melissa, or are they just coming there for the free content? They're going to be like, well, why would I pay for something if I'm just getting all these tools and iterations? So her biggest thing is now I have to get people off of social media, get them either into my email list or my SMS list or my free experiences. and get them seeing that it's not just about, oh, if you have this back issue, do this exercise. It's about transformation. And what does that look like? And so that's where a lot more of the stories, relatable content, system, all that like back end business stuff. And you know this, Brandon, like social media is an important part of business. You have to do it, but it's not a business. A lot of people think that, oh, I just need more followers. And I have friends that have millions of followers that work a regular job, and that's fine, but they're not, raking in the dough. And then I have a client right now with 600 followers who made like $26,000 last week. 600 followers.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where you have to your point, what are you focused on? What's the goal? So to answer your question, if you're going into launch, you're probably focusing a lot more on the symptoms post, right? Really putting out a lot of, I call it going fishing, finding the people in your audience that are resonating with this content and need this thing. You're probably doing more stories like, oh, if this is you, then I have something for you. Probably not as many solutions-based posts. So if you're between launches, maybe you ratchet up the solutions-based post and just put on your expert hat and grow your audience. I call it being in anabolic mode as a fitness professional. It's like anabolic and catabolic. Anabolic mode is between launches where you're sort of growing, you're building your list, you're building the goodwill, you're building trust, you're nurturing. And then catabolic is when you're selling. And we kind of have this sort of roller coaster throughout the year. And so if you're in that more anabolic mode, you just close cart. Maybe you just drop a content bomb and just teach a bunch and get new people in and start growing your following so that you can get them ready for the next launch.
I love it. And do you also find that like certain businesses, people in niches or industries, I guess, will do better with one style more than the other? Because when I look around, like we have one client who's doing really well with like educational type stuff because of the industry they're in and they're going viral and stuff. But then I look at like holistic psychologist and she's not very educational. She's very symptom-based content. Do you find that like a business will tend to do better with one than the other? Is it just kind of a crapshoot, or what have you noticed?
Mm-hmm. I can't speak to a lot of different industries because I really primarily work with health and wellness people. I can tell you with our demographic, people are looking for solutions. It's a really, I don't want to say saturated, I hate using the word saturated, but it's a pretty saturated marketplace. So this is where we can't compete on credentials. Like you can't be the smartest person, right? Like it's not, most people have a personal training cert and they're all about the same level. Unless you're like an MD or a PhD or whatever, like typically most personal trainers and nutrition coaches have around the same level of expertise. So you're the smartest, you're not going to have the best tips and tools. The thing that you're going to be able to compete on is the connection. And so this is where I think there's massive, massive opportunity right now, especially in a space where information is commodity, right? I mean, I can Google right now, free workout, Instagram, and find 50,000 free workouts. So the thing that's going to get someone to come to your page is going to probably be the solutions, but to get them to buy, it's going to be, do I feel like Jill can understand me? Do I feel like we're similar enough? Do I feel like she really gets it? Or is she just really smart? And I think that's one way to get someone in is with your expertise, but the way to make them a client is going to be around the connection piece, because that's going to be where I think about it like this. The space being saturated is, I don't know, growing up, we used to go to this, I grew up in Boston and they had this ice cream shop called Brigham's. And you'd go to Brigham's and it was like chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, coffee, and I don't know, like chocolate chip or something. It's like 5 things. And you're like, well, I don't really like any of them, but I'm just going to do chocolate because it's the best of the 5. Now, if you go to Cold Stone Creamery, there's 5 different versions of just chocolate. There's double chocolate, triple chocolate, chocolate chunk, right? So that's kind of the way the coaching space is now. When I started, there was just the 5 flavors.
Right.
Now, the potential client can choose the exact right coach for them. They don't have to settle for someone who's okay. They're going to try and find the coach that has the very specific flavor that they are looking for. And that's going to include them being an expert, but it's also going to include the connection piece, the relatability, right? All of those things. And so the days of just sitting back on your expertise are sort of over. We have to really add some flavor to it. And so that's where pulling back the curtain, sharing your story, sharing all that kind of stuff really comes in.
Yeah. And it's great too, because when people say that it's oversaturated, there's so many competitors and blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, yeah, that may be true that there's more competitors now than ever, but there's also more amount of customers now than ever as well. And they are looking for exactly that right fit, that person that fits
And they should.
exactly who they are. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you
exactly.
can't be generic. Like you can't be, and I'm not like a big, like you have to be polarizing just for the sake of polarization, but
Right.
you do have to have a flavor about you. So if you're someone who, I don't know, if you're someone who cusses, that's probably, I don't recommend using that as like a tactic, but if you are someone who does that in person, it's okay to do that online and let people come down on either side of that. We are seeing a lot of that right now politically. We're seeing a lot of that religiously, like, and again, you don't have to ever talk about religion, politics in your business if you don't want to, but there are different ways, even nutrition. I'm for macros. People are like, macros are the worst or macros are the best or whatever. So you have to, in a way, you have to have an opinion and you do have to draw a line in the sand for people to be able to come down. So I always say the worst response for people is like, oh, Jill, she's fine. She's okay. Like we just don't want that, right? You want like, she's my number one, or like that chick's not for me. And we want to create a level of that.
And I think you said it perfectly, which is like you can choose what that is, but I think it comes down to authenticity, knowing who you are, knowing what you want to take a stand for, what are your beliefs, and then analyzing all of that and then deciding what do I want to bring into the brand, because whatever it is you bring into the brand, that's exactly who you're going to attract back. So if you're like, look, I want to cuss when I'm doing my trainings and I want people to be okay with that. Like when I work with my customers, then like, great, maybe cuss in your brand, or like with me, I take a stand on doing too much educational content, and some people don't like that, but I'm like, I truly believe that if you overteach, you're not going to make any sales. I just really believe that. That's a belief that I incorporate into my brand. So this has been amazing, Jill. So just to recap, we have a superpower, solution, story, system, services, and symptoms. Did I get that right?
That's it.
Bam. Love it.
Yeah.
I know you have some free trainings and stuff as well. Do you tell the audience a little bit about what you have for them and then where they can go to grab it?
Yeah, for sure. So if you guys are interested in learning more, of course, we can always connect on social. I'm just at Jill Fit on all of the socials. And if you're interested and you are a health and wellness professional, my podcast is called Fit Biz You, and Brandon's actually been on it. And so it's called Fit Biz You, and it's all just like bite-sized episodes that are really tactical and really strategic around fitness business. So that is probably the number one place if you're just interested in this content and want to learn more. And then, if you are someone who is looking to scale, we do have a free secret podcast, which is a brand new podcast of ours. It's called the Advanced Business Blueprint. And I will definitely just give you the link. You can throw it in the show notes if you want to, but it's 100% free if you guys are interested in scaling, especially if you're looking to scale to multiple six figures, even seven figures. It's for that person who really wants to learn more about what we're talking about today, especially the launch model and incorporating paid traffic and team and all that kind of stuff. So for those of you who are in that intermediate to advanced level of business, that would be the next step.
Awesome. If that's you, head down to the show notes, check it out there. I'll also have the team set up a link. Let's just use brandonlucero.com/Jill, and then that'll redirect to whatever that link is. So brandonlucero.com/Jill. Head over there, grab that free training. If you are a fitness or wellness expert, a personal trainer, head over there, grab that now. Jill, thank you so much for coming on today, spending almost an hour with us and sharing your wisdom. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. All right, guys, if you enjoyed this episode and you have not left us a review on iTunes, please head over to do that. And I will see you all next week. Take care, everyone.
Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, go below, hit the subscribe button, and make sure you click on that bell icon and get notified every time we drop a new episode. Now, if you're looking for the show notes, we have them linked underneath this video, as well as our social media handles and some links to free training and offers that we drop from time to time to help you guys even further. So go check those out if you're interested, and thank you so much for tuning in to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast.